In the hours before June 29, 1995, cracks were spreading across the ceiling of a busy Seoul department store. Employees reported it. Engineers inspected it and recommended an immediate evacuation. Management kept the doors open. By early evening, the building came down, the entire south wing collapsing in an estimated 20 seconds, killing 502 people in one of the deadliest building collapses in modern history. The SAMPOONG department store opened in Seoul district, Seoul, in 1990 and quickly became one of the city's most popular shopping destinations, a 5-story building serving well over 1,000 customers at a time. The building's story, though, starts earlier and stranger than most retail spaces. It was originally designed as an office building. Partway through construction, the developer, Lee Jun, chairman of the SAMPOONG Group, decided to convert it into a department store instead, a change that came with a critical structural cost. Office buildings and department stores carry very different loads, and department stores generally need far more support, not less. To make the retail layout work, several of the building's support columns were removed or narrowed during this conversion to open up wider retail floor space. His own contractors objected. They were replaced with contractors willing to proceed.
The column removal alone significantly weakened the building's ability to carry its intended load. But the decisions that followed compounded the problem rather than correcting it. Lee later decided to add a 5th floor, which city planning authorities had specifically prohibited for further retail use. To work around that restriction, the new floor was built as restaurants with a large rooftop pool. His contractors objected again, warning that the added weight of the floor itself, plus the pool, plus the water it would hold, exceeded what the modified structure could bear. They, too, were dismissed. Then came the rooftop air conditioning units, equipment purportedly around 4 times heavier than the roof's design allowed for. Rather than lifting the units into place with a crane, which would have distributed the load more carefully during installation, they were dragged across the rooftop. That process alone caused visible cracking in the roof structure before the units were even in regular operation. By the mid-1990s, the building was carrying a rooftop pool, oversized air conditioning equipment, an unauthorized additional floor, and years of accumulated structural damage, all resting on a support structure that had already been weakened by column removal during its original conversion from office space.
In April of 1995, roughly 2 months before the collapse, cracks began appearing throughout the structure. Engineers who inspected the building recommended closing it immediately for repairs. Lee refused, citing the store's high customer volume and the profit he stood to lose by closing. By the morning of June 29th, the cracking had become severe enough that the 5th floor was closed off as a precaution. The store's lower floors stayed open and busy. By early afternoon, cracks had widened further and the 4th floor ceiling was visibly sagging. At that point, the upper floors were finally closed, but management still declined to evacuate the building entirely or to close the ground floor, where the highest concentration of shoppers remained. At around 5:52 in the evening, the roof structure gave way under the combined weight of the pool, the air conditioning units, and years of unrepaired damage. Once the roof failed, the floors below had nothing left to arrest the collapse. The south wing of the building came down floor through floor all the way to the ground in an estimated 20 seconds. 502 people died. 937 were injured. It remains one of the deadliest building collapses in peacetime history. Unlike Ronan Point or Tacoma Narrows,
This collapse wasn't the result of an engineering miscalculation or an unforeseen physical phenomenon. Every structural warning sign here was identified in real time by qualified engineers, and every one of those warnings was overridden by a decision to keep operating. The subsequent investigation and criminal trial laid out the chain plainly. Unauthorized structural modifications, substandard construction materials used to cut costs, a rooftop load far beyond the building's design capacity, and a documented pattern of dismissing or firing anyone who raised safety concerns. Regulatory oversight also failed at multiple points. Inspections that should have caught these violations were reportedly superficial or bypassed entirely, in some cases through bribery of building officials. Lee Jun was convicted of criminal negligence resulting in death and sentenced to over a decade in prison, later reduced on appeal. A structural engineer involved in the modifications was also convicted. This is one of the few episodes in this series where the individuals responsible faced criminal consequences directly tied to the disaster.
The SAMPOONG department store was never rebuilt. The site is now a memorial to the victims. The collapse prompted major reform in South Korea's building safety regulations, stricter inspection requirements, tighter enforcement against unauthorized structural modifications, and a broader public reckoning with how rapid development had, in some cases, outpaced safety oversight. It's studied globally today, alongside cases like Ronan Point, as an example of what engineers call progressive collapse, but where Ronan Point's failure came from a design that lacked structural redundancy, SAMPOONG's came from a structure that was deliberately, repeatedly pushed past the limits it was ever designed to hold.